Hello and welcome to this video about cash transfers and about how to report cash transfers in the Humanitarian Carbon Calculator tool. In this video, I will explain what to enter in the Humanitarian Carbon Calculator tool when a humanitarian organization donates cash to another humanitarian organization and when a humanitarian organization donates cash to beneficiaries, so in case of cash assistance. Let's start with cash transfers between humanitarian organizations. Imagine that we have Humanitarian Organization 1 donating money to Humanitarian Organization 2 such that Humanitarian Organization 2 is able to fulfill its humanitarian programs. In this case, Humanitarian Organization 1 should report the value of the donation in the Financial Support Emissions subcategory, which is part of the Purchase Products and Services Emissions category. And Humanitarian Organization 2, on the other hand, does not need to do anything special. It should just report its activities in the Humanitarian Carbon Calculator tool as usual. Okay, so how does this look like in the Humanitarian Carbon Calculator tool? Well, you have this financial support category here in the Goods and Services tab. And this is where Humanitarian Organization 1, in our example, will enter the value of its donations. So imagine Humanitarian Organization 1 donates 100,000 euros to Humanitarian Organization 2. Then Humanitarian Organization 1 would enter 100,000 euros against this emissions factor here, which is an emissions factor for humanitarian work. If Humanitarian Organization 2 is a medical humanitarian organization, like MSF, for example, then it can use this emissions factor here, which is specific to medical services. If Humanitarian Organization 2 uses the money in accordance with Humanitarian Organization 1, if it uses the money for a construction project, then Humanitarian Organization 1 can use this emissions factor here, which is specific to construction work. And maybe a bit less relevant, but if Humanitarian Organization 2 uses the money for cultural events, then Humanitarian Organization 1 can use this last emissions factor here. These emissions factors are in no ways perfect. They have an uncertainty rate of 80%, and the aim would be to improve these over time. Alternatively, if Humanitarian Organization 2 uses the Humanitarian Carbon Calculator tool or any similar tool, then it can retrieve its average volume of CO2 equivalents per euro or dollar spent from the tool. In the Humanitarian Carbon Calculator tool, this information is displayed in the Results tab here. So basically, this says that Humanitarian Organization 2 emits on average, and either directly or indirectly, 0.27 tons of CO2 equivalent per unit spent. And the unit is in fact the unit in which the budget was entered in the General Information tab. So it's basically the unit in which these numbers were entered here. So if these numbers are expressed in euros, then this reads as 0.27 tons of CO2 equivalents per euro spent. But if these numbers are expressed in thousands of US dollars, then this reads as 0.27 tons of CO2 equivalents per thousands of US dollars. Humanitarian Organization 2 can then share this value with Humanitarian Organization 1, and Humanitarian Organization 1 can then create a new monetary emissions factor with the shared value here. And this new monetary emissions factor then represents donations to humanitarian organization 2. So it's a very specific emissions factor. How to create new emissions factors is explained in the emissions factors video. Note that we would only advise this alternative option if and only if humanitarian organization 2 has reached a mature scope in terms of completeness. If not, then this number here would not be complete enough to be used by humanitarian organization 1. Let's now have a look at cash transfers to beneficiaries, so cash assistance. Imagine now that we have humanitarian organization 1 providing cash to beneficiaries. So I'm talking about cash assistance here. In this case, humanitarian organization 1 should report the value of the cash assistance intervention in the cash assistance emissions subcategory, which is part of the purchased products and services emissions category. So again, how does this look like in the Humanitarian Carbon Calculator tool? Well, you have this cash assistance category here in the goods and services tab still. And this is where humanitarian organization 1, in our example, will enter the value of its cash assistance intervention. So there are different cash assistance emissions factors for different countries. Imagine humanitarian organization 1 donates a total of 100,000 euros to beneficiaries in Algeria. Then it can use this emissions factor here. So the emissions factor requires to enter the data in US dollars. So a humanitarian organization 1 would have to convert 100,000 euros to US dollars by using the average exchange rate over the reporting periods. So let's say the average exchange rate is 1 euro equals 0.98 US dollars. So the good news is that we have emissions factors for cash assistance, and these were calculated taking into consideration the average emissions per capita in a certain country and the GDP of that country. But again, just like with the financial support emissions factors, the cash assistance emissions factors are in no ways perfect. But it's a start, and these will be improved over time. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it is now clear to you how to manage cash transfers in the Humanitarian Carbon Calculator tool.